Welcome back, everybody. Let's have a look at another semi-formal letter. We'll read it out. Your child is going on a 3-day school trip to another country. The head teacher wants to find parents to go with the group, and you would like to go. Write a letter to the head teacher. In your letter, say why you would like to go on the trip, suggest what you could do to help during the trip, and ask other questions about the trip. Now, you may have some concerns about the tone here. Let's talk about that in a moment when we come to the tone step. But the first step, as always, is to have a look at the key words, as that will help to determine the tone. So it's your child. That's quite important. We're going to mention our relation to the child. Going on a 3-day school trip. We can talk about that as well. That 3-day is important. They wouldn't have written 3-day if it wasn't important, so we should refer to that. To another country. Also important, it's abroad, it's not in the same country. The head teacher, so this is who we're writing to here. The head teacher wants to find parents to go, so we need parents to go with the group to help out, and you would like to go. You'd like to go with the group. Now, we need to write a letter to the head teacher, and in the letter, we would need to say why we would like to go on the trip. We need to suggest what you could do to help during the trip. This is the point of going. It's mostly to offer some help, and ask any other questions. This one's quite open-ended here, so we could be quite creative in that paragraph. Ask other questions about the trip. So, what tone should we be using in a letter like this? Now, you already know that this is in the semi-formal category, so I have thought that it's a semi-formal letter. But if you think you should be writing in a formal tone throughout, that is perfectly fine. You can absolutely write this in an entirely formal tone. You would not be penalized at all. You certainly would be penalized if you wrote it in an informal tone. An informal tone is not appropriate in this setting. The only reason that I am not going for the full formal is because we're not in a business setting. We're not talking to someone who is entirely remote from us. This is somebody that we do know, we are likely to know from things like parents' evenings with the school. And in an educational setting like this, using a semi-formal tone, as long as it leans towards the formal and not towards the informal, that is okay. But we should be leaning more towards the formal than the informal. And you'll see the vocabulary that I use in this letter will look just like that. So we have the tone, it's semi-formal here, so a semi-formal letter. And what do you think is the purpose of this letter? It's not really got a very strong purpose, like within a single word. It's like an offer. We are offering something. That's all I can write here, but the purpose varies. We want to say that we would like to go. So in a sense, it's also a request, but it's not quite a request because we're actually offering our services at the same time. We've been asked to do something and we're saying, yeah, we can do that. So it's an offer, sort of a request. In this case, it's one of those weird cases. They come up every once in a while where there isn't a clear purpose. But that doesn't mean that we cannot create a purpose within the letter itself. We just need to be a little bit more selective with our language. I'll show you what I mean by that when we come to the purpose sentence. So let's first of all think about the plan though. And this is clear enough. We're given our directions for each of the paragraphs. First of all, we want to say why we would like to go on the trip. And we can say that we want to go on the trip because let's say it fits our holiday schedule. So it fits vacation schedule, holiday schedule, whatever you want to write there with particular work. And this is like an offer, really, as I've said. And we can say that we want to contribute to the school. We want to do something nice for the school for whatever reason. Then we want to say what we could do to help during the trip. Now you've got to think about school trips and sort of think about school trip vocabulary. What sort of things typically happen on school trips? Well, I'm sure there will be particular activities and we could sort of help look after the children. So look after kids. I wouldn't write kids, but I'm just, because it's the plan, I want to keep it short. Look after kids. And also when you go away on a school trip, there needs to be someone there who is trained in first aid. So we could say that we have a first aid certification, so we can help on that front as well. So if anybody chokes or if anybody gets injured, we know how to deal with those problems. Unless it's a very serious injury, of course you would get paramedics and you take them to hospital, but generally for smaller injuries or issues like that, it's first aid, or it's in the moment before the paramedics arrive. So if somebody falls unconscious, we know to put them in the recovery position, things like that. That is first aid. So in paragraph 4, we're asking other questions about the trip. What could we say here? Other questions might include, imagine that you're going on this trip. What would you want to know? So you probably want to know how much you would have to work. That sounds a bit too casual to ask it in that way. So we might say something like, how many hours would we have to work? Could we be expected to work each day? We'll look at the vocabulary later, but we need to be careful with that. And it says questions, always look for the plurals. It's quite important that you don't just ask one question, because then that does not cover the task requirements, but we need to do 2 or more. So let's just go with 2. Where are we going to be staying? So accommodation, maybe the rooms as well, or just generally accommodation. So there's our plan, and we can move into the letter. So we've got a dear. Is it likely to be Sir, Madame, or is it likely to be someone's name? It's likely to be someone's name. We're going to know the name of the head teacher of the school, but we wouldn't use a first name. We would go, just like the children, we would use Mr. or Mrs. and then the name. So let's go with Dear Mr. Jones. Dear Mr. Jones, I am writing to you. Okay, nice and simple start. Semi-formal letters will usually begin this way. I am writing to, or I'm writing to you too. And in this case, as I said, the purpose of a request, it's difficult to really ascertain what the exact purpose is. So I'm going to instead use this quite useful bit of language. With regard to. Just, I am writing to you about this situation. About is informal, or at least it's not got that level of sophistication of a semi-formal or formal letter. So with regard to is more appropriate, but with regard to would be strange in an informal letter. So in an informal letter, we can write about. So I'm writing to you with regard to, and then we'll just reference the trip itself. The upcoming trip to, and we want to reference its fact it's in another country, so let's just let's bring in the name of a city in a different country. Let's say Sevilla. Planned for, now here we can reference back as well. We have a 3-day school trip, so let's reference the fact it's a 3-day school trip. Let's say for, or from, I should say, planned from, let's say Friday the 12th of October to Sunday the 14th of October. So that's 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm assuming that's how they mean it here. That should be quite clear for the examiners. It should be clear Friday, Saturday, Sunday is a 3-day trip. Particularly if you arrive in the morning and you leave in the evening. There'll be 3 days to plan for the school itself. So that seems to be okay to me. And we have sufficient detail here as we want. Because we don't have a clear purpose, we need to be very clear about the details of the trip. And then we can move into the first main paragraph and the second paragraph in general. So we need to clearly indicate who we are. This is your child, remember, so we'll make that very clear to begin with, because this is going to indicate why we want to go on the trip as well. So it fits the vacation, but also we're the father of one of the children, otherwise it would be a bit strange. So it's important that we indicate who we are and our relation to the student. My son, it wouldn't make sense to not add his name here, so let's add his name. Say Jamie Michaels. It's not enough to say Jamie. Jamie Michaels is appropriate because they're going to have loads of Jamies. I know that they could read your name at the end of the letter, but better to just put it here. My son, Jamie Michaels, nice bit of grammatical range, has informed me that, has told me that, but has informed me, improving the tone here, has informed me, so present perfect, that you are looking, moving to the present continuous, you are looking for parents to help is okay. Let's go with the verb assist with the group. Now I've just written the group because this is, again, I've talked about this a lot, but it's shared knowledge. We haven't mentioned any group, but we know that it's a group that is going on the trip. So we don't have to be too specific, we just say the group. And what are we writing to do here? We're writing to say we would like to go. And I would like to go with you. We can do better than that, I think. Let's say something like this: to put myself forward as a volunteer. Okay, so if this were a fully formal letter, I would probably instead write something like, I would like to declare my interest in this project. I would like to offer my services. But this is why I'm pulling it back and calling it a semi-formal letter, because that just sounds a little bit too dry, a little bit too distant. It's very possible we're going to have to spend time with this head teacher on the trip itself. If the head teacher comes with us, it's kind of unlikely, but we're probably going to be interacting with them. And so we don't want to be too formal, I think. So put myself forward as a volunteer seems more appropriate. It's not informal, but it's semi-formal. Okay, then we can look at the plan. Specifically, why do we want to go? Let's say because or since the trip falls right in line with my time off from work this year. So again, language that's not too formal, it falls in line rather than just fits or appears at the same time as, but falls in line. So a little bit more colloquial, but not informal. Okay, so since the trip falls right in line with my time off from work this year, notice we're using a subordinating conjunction. Here is the dependent clause. Let's follow it with the independent clause to make a complex sentence. Joining you, so we're using the gerund here, joining you for the 3 days, and referencing the fact it's 3 days, would allow me to combine my holiday time with let's contribute, what's the noun? Contribution to the school. Okay, so we want to say that we are combining these two things. This is why we want to go. So some nice complex vocabulary, some nice complex structures here appearing as well. Then we can move on to suggesting what we could do to help. So we'll jump straight into it. We can talk about wanting to do multiple things or being able to do multiple things. So we'll begin with this aside from. Aside from A and B, we could also do C. So again, creating another nice complex sentence. So aside from looking after the children, remember, not kids. I've written in the plan, but not kids because that's too informal. Aside from looking after the children, you could also say students, that would be fine. Looking after the children or students while they explore the city. Notice the use of while here is to mean at the same time as. So not using it like the conjunction the same as whereas, it's to mean at the same time as. So aside from looking after the children while they explore the city, I could also, or I would also be happy to, so I could also, it's the same as I would also be happy to. Let's imagine they have some activities, so we could use a phrasal verb here. It's okay in a semi-formal letter to use some phrasal verbs. Even in formal letters, certain phrasal verbs are okay, but you just have to be careful with which ones you choose. To set up and participate in any activities that might be scheduled. Okay, so there's a nice balance of formal and slightly less formal, but not informal, vocabulary. So we're striking that balance well. And then we want to talk about first aid. So it might not be necessary, but it might be necessary. And as a result, we should use some language like this. It is also worth mentioning. Hopefully it won't come up, but it's important. You could also say it is important for you to know that, or it is also important for you to know that. But this is a bit nicer, a little bit more advanced. It is also worth mentioning that I am, here's the collocation, trained in first aid. Why does this matter? So, notice not a therefore, which would be more formal. So, in the unfortunate case of a medical emergency, I could assist on this front, would be a nice way to put it. Assist in this case. Remember, we're not actually fixing the medical emergency, we're just assisting with it. So we're just there until the paramedics arrive. We know how to deal with that emergency situation in the initial stages. Okay, let's close the letter with the last main paragraph, which is asking other questions about the trip. So we can just explain the purpose of the paragraph, because it's quite different from the other paragraphs. It kind of appears quite abruptly. We want to be specific. We want to give the purpose, essentially, of the paragraph straight away. I just have a couple of questions about the trip. And this is a point to make as well. If there is a clear purpose throughout the letter, then you don't have to make it so clear what the purpose of each paragraph is straight away. But if there is a clear divergence and there's a very specific purpose to a very specific paragraph, it is important that you make it as clear as possible what that is. So I just have a couple of questions about the trip. That makes it very clear what we want to talk about in this paragraph. What this does as well is this opens up the opportunity for some listing language. So let's bring some in here. Firstly, how many hours? Just take it straight from the plan. And this is the language I said that we should use. Can we expect to work each day? If I write, how long do I have to work? That just sounds like you're already unhappy with the work. It sounds like it's an obligation. It sounds like you don't want to do it. But if we use how many hours can we expect to work each day, it sounds like a more innocent question. You just need to know because you need to know how you're going to plan your day. Also notice the pronoun that we've got here. Can we expect to work each day? You're not just taking it on your shoulders, you're talking about all of the parents and teachers that are going to be working together. That's why I'm using we here. And I'm going to do it again. Notice that I'm starting with an and. You could argue that's touching on a little bit informal, but I don't think it's too bad personally. And secondly, what can we expect? Again, we're using that verb expect. It's a bit more polite. What can we expect in terms of accommodation? Remember the question marks. Oh, and that's not very good from me, but yes, we need question marks in both cases. How many hours? What can we expect? The punctuation is very important, but at least I went back and fixed it. That's as long as it's there before you hand it in, that's the important thing. So what can we expect in terms of accommodation? Again, we're using we to mean all of the teachers together, joining in a team effort. So you're just improving and emphasizing that sense of you're not an individual, but you're contributing to a team. These little details are important. They are what separate the 8s from the 9s. Okay, and then we'll finish up with nice and simple. I look forward to hearing from you. We can do that certainly here. And let's finish with, you could go with the best regards. That would be okay. I'm going to go with the yours sincerely. As I said, this is really because this semi-formal letter leans much more towards the formal than the informal. So a yours sincerely is okay, but so is a best regards. So don't worry too much about that. But remember, it's sincerely and not faithfully because we have the recipient's name above. And then let's finish, I don't know, with the name. Actually, the name here is quite important, because we have our son, we need to make sure we have, of course you do have families nowadays in the modern world with different surnames, but in this case for sure, it's good if we just try and remember the details, get them consistent. Jamie Michaels, the dad will be Mark Michaels. Okay, so here was a semi-formal letter looking at a letter with less of a a clear and unambiguous sense of purpose, there is a little bit more work for the writer to do in terms of thinking about how to respond to the task. But hopefully this letter has provided you with some language that you can use for tackling that particular problem. You can have a look at the gap fill exercise now, and I'll see you in the next lecture.